Today we are reading Hunting for Hidden Gold by Franklin W. Dixon. When we last left the Hardys, they had trapped Big Al on top of a rock. Chapter 16, Cliff Hideaway. "You'll never get me alive!" screamed Big Al. He reached the top of a huge boulder and now stood waving his arms against the leaden sky. The outlaw was jumping around as though half crazed. "Try to get me," he challenged. As Frank and Joe sped into the jumble of rocks, they lost sight of their quarry momentarily. They could still hear Big Al yelling, then suddenly there was silence. "Well, wonder what happened," Joe panted. Did he... He was interrupted by a long, drawn-out scream, which gradually trailed off. And then there was silence. Dashing from the rocks, the boys came around a corner. Before them was the huge boulder. "He's gone," Joe panted. "But where?" There was no place for Big Al to have run except down the rocky trail on which the boys had been. He must have jumped over the ledge," Joe yelled. The Hardys ran to it. They could see most of the canyon for below them. There was no sign of a body. He must have gone down," Frank said, puzzled. "But where is he?" The boys looked closely again in the waning light. There was no one in sight. "I wonder," Joe said slowly, "even if Big Al did go over the side, he must have known a safe way to slide to the bottom. And there may be a hiding place." Frank agreed. "Big Al's pretty tricky. He could have figured out some way to escape." As the light faded, the brothers strained their eyes to peer into the darkness, but they could detect no niche, crevice, or cave in which to hide. "Well," Frank murmured at last, "there isn't much we can do tonight. I sure hate to think Big Al's roaming out there loose, though." Joe looked towards the sky. It was dark now, and they were a long distance up Windy Peak. "What do we do, Frank?" he asked. "There's only one thing to do," his brother said. "We'll spend the night here. Tomorrow we might manage to find some trace of Big Al. I want to know if he's dead or alive." "I do too," Joe exclaimed. "We'll have to make camp," Frank said, "but first we better do something about our horses." "Yes, and Big Al's too," Joe added, pointing to the outlaw's fine roan that was still ground-hitched. The boys gathered the three animals together, rode back to the fork, and secured the horses to the rocks. "These old fellows will provide us with a good warning system," Frank remarked. "How?" his brother asked. Frank explained his idea. "We'll leave them here, and we'll go partway back along the trail to make camp. If Big Al is alive, he'll have to come past here, since all the trails meet at this spot, and he'll want his roan anyway. The horses will sure whinny and awaken us." "Good scheme," Joe said. "We'll camp at Rock Motel." "Every comfort and all for free," Frank joked. The boys ate, fed the horses, then carted their bedrolls and meager supplies to a sheltered spot and quickly spread out the blankets. Though the brothers were tired, sleep was slow in coming. "I can't help wondering if Big Al is tricking us again," Frank said uneasily as he finally drifted off to sleep. He dreamed several times about the outlaw and tried to figure out why he and his brother had not seen Big Al's body in the gorge. Both boys slept fitfully through the night. As the blackness of the sky began to lighten with the coming of dawn, they got up and ate their cold but nourishing breakfast of oranges, oatmeal cookies, and egg flakes. Refreshed, the boys walked towards the edge of the cliff over which Big Al had disappeared. "We may be able to see something more in the daylight," Joe remarked. Frank had been staring into the gray, lowering sky. "I doubt if there's anything to see," he observed. "What do you mean?" Frank scanned the sky once more. "I think we've been fooled again," he answered. "If there had been a body down in the gorge, there'd be carrion birds flying around." "Of course," Joe said. "I wondered about it last night, but thought maybe it was so late that there wouldn't be any birds at work, but there'd be some in the morning. There'd be something to attract them." "Well, let's look over the edge again," Joe suggested. The brothers dropped to their stomachs and crept as close as they could to the rim. By leaning well over it, they could look almost to the base of the cliff. "See anything, Joe?" Not a thing. Suddenly, from far below came the rattle of small pebbles. A great black raven flew out of the precipice. "There must be a nest in the cliff, Joe cried out. The boys edged over the rough stones. They held on as tightly as possible before leaning over to locate the nest. "There it is!" exclaimed Frank. Below them in a recess that nature had torn in this cliffside was a bird's nest, and alongside it, enough room to give a man shelter. That was Big Al's hiding place, Frank said grimly. He probably swung down there to the left and probably got away during the night. Frank and Joe crawled back from the cliff edge until they could stand up safely. He fooled us all right, said Frank. I wonder how long it was before he left there. Maybe, Joe suggested. It depended on the horses. I bet he waited until just before dawn and then stole them. Frank was angry. Of course, his horse would know him, and since the other animals had been together and gotten to be friends, none of them would have whinnied in alarm. I should have realized that. The boys dashed for the fork in the road. Their guess had been right. The horses were gone and taken up the steeper branch. Al did trick us, Frank chided himself. Now he's really got us in a spot, murmured his brother. Do we head for home or trail him? Trail him, Frank decided promptly. We'll have to walk, of course. Can we make it up there? Joe sounded worried. I don't know, but we'll have to try. The brothers huddled in the shelter of a rock to discuss the situation. What lay ahead? They realized it may be a long, treacherous climb. Perhaps another night without hot food and proper shelter. And they noticed it was growing colder, and that was a bad sign too. It was not only going to be uncomfortable for the Hardys, but they could easily freeze to death. Come on, Joe, Frank said, resolutely as they started up the big, steep trail. We're not going to let Big Al get away. Joe joined his brother, and together they started climbing along this part of Ambush Trail. The turns were abrupt, and the wind whistled sharply. Once Joe had to snatch Frank back when the wind nearly blew him over the ledge. For hours the boys toiled along the trail, following the string of horseshoe prints. During the afternoon, the marks made an abrupt turn that opened onto a plateau. It was almost completely surrounded by jagged outcroppings of rock. The boys ducked down out of the strong wind which had swept the area almost clean of snow. Suddenly, their eyes bulged as they spotted a small cabin that lay nestled in the center of the little plateau. From its chimney came a thin wisp of smoke. Somebody's there, Joe said excitedly, and instinctively began to run. Wait! Frank warned. It might be Big Al. We'd better approach cautiously. Say, Joe, look! On a ridge beyond the cabin was a single weather-beaten pine tree. The lone pine, Joe exclaimed. Yes, and if it is, that might be Mike Onslow's cabin, now occupied by Big Al.